There's something about my formative years of being on the internet that I yearn for. They weren't more simple times by any means, but they did have a sense of a home and nostalgia to it that just can't be matched. Sure, I could gush about how meme culture and video formatting was
You ain't got no pancake mix!
pretty cool at the time, but there's something a bit more fundamental that I was yearning for. Back when talking to friends online was the highlight of my day once I got home from school. I'd pop on the latest Paramore album and start up AOL Instant Messenger and say hi to some peeps. I'd even start up an emulator and start tackling Link's Awakening or something. Back when my mind wasn't constantly thinking about a billion things that I could be doing at a given moment. I was just simply living in the moment and enjoying what I was doing. It just made it easier to peruse forums, where I spent the majority of my times back in those days. Just spending my time looking at what others had to say about certain topics, and of course making my own. While I was mostly confined to one forum at a time, there's actually one that may have shaped the way I interact with people and possibly caused me to become as speculative as I am. A forum, for the most part, that isn't about mundane topics, but rather about forum games. Every forum I've been a part of had their share of forum games. Count to 100 before the mod post, compliment the person above you, or grant the wish of the person that's above you but with a twist, which was one of my most fond at the time. There's just something about finding creative ways to screw people over by giving them what they want. However, there's just one such game that no matter how long I forget about it, eventually it pops back into my head. It goes by the name Mafia, but some people call it Werewolf, Who's the Killer, Town of Salem, Among Us but Without Tasks, or that one game that actually requires friends to play. It was originally a party game, but it was adapted to play through forums, and honestly I remember checking my phone every hour or so just to see how things have changed. The game is very simple, but it takes an unfortunately very long time to explain, which turns off a ton of people. Trust me. Explaining it quickly itself is an art form. Though, thanks to Among Us, the game is probably a lot easier to understand nowadays. Basically, you start off with a set number of players. It can be anywhere from 6 to 13, though in some circumstances it can be as low as 4 or as high as 30. There's a small portion of the players that are the Mafia, or the killing faction, and the rest of them are just trying to figure out who the Mafia are and get rid of them. For simplicity's sake, I won't get into all the caveats that are made, but I will note them down below and get back to them later. Let's say you start off with 8 players. One player will be the game moderator, who doesn't take part in the game, but their job is to give each player a role/faction. That and keep up with the mechanical side of the game. Each player will receive their faction of either being a part of the Mafia or the town's members. Each part of the game takes place in phases. There's a day phase and a night phase. During the day is the typical part of the game, where people talk to each other and get a feel for who they think the imposters or the Mafia are. Eventually, all the players will discuss who they believe the Mafia are, based on the social interactions of each player, and of course, the Mafia will try their best to divert their attention to another player. Once the players come to a conclusion on who to eliminate from the game, the majority voted player will be kicked out of the game and whether or not they are the imposter will be revealed. After this is where the night phase happens, where the remaining Mafia players will agree on who to remove from the game, be it a player that's onto them, or someone else just to throw things into chaos. After this, the day phase happens again, and it's revealed the player that was killed by the Mafia. This goes on like this for a little while until the Mafia are all eliminated from the game, or they make up 50% of the remaining players or more. Again, perhaps slightly confusing and a bit of a mouthful, but an incredibly simple game once you start playing. And boy, look at all those caveats. The Mafia that I played the most was Forum Mafia, which is pretty much the same as typical Mafia, only these games take place over the course of a month or two, as well as players can play as many games as they want to. Good old Mafia Scum, a website that I frequented the most, was a host of all kinds of games, ranging from only needing 4 players to play, to nearly a 40-player game, which is just as much chaos as it sounds like. Man, I've actually met all kinds of people while playing there as well. People from various other countries, lawyers, game developers, even psychology students. No game was ever the same because the personalities of the players that were presented were varied widely. I mean, they varied so much that reading an entire player's history on the site was a part of figuring out who the Mafia was or not. In Forum Mafia, however, there's only one major rule that you're not allowed to break. And that's talking about the game outside of the game if it's still going. Like I said, these games go on for months. So it's important that we keep these games under wrap to ensure that psychological warfare is confined to one place. A rule that's incredibly restricting, but honestly what keeps the game far more engaging. The only place to talk about the game and what's going on in it confined to the game itself, giving things more of a claustrophobic feel to it, with conversations ongoing in the topic. Sure, some people can talk about things that's going on outside the game, but that's usually frowned upon. You're in a social environment with upwards to 7 or so people that you more or less are either lying to or think that they're lying to you. Arguments in this setting aren't just common, they're the norm. It's a place where nearly everything is nitpicked so that a conclusion is formed. And I don't know about you, but it can get pretty heated when someone tells you that you're a liar simply for saying that you said something a certain way. There's complete strangers having disputes with each other over something as trivial as how someone said hi to another while playing the game. And while it is fun watching a train wreck happen between two players, it's incredibly fun getting into it myself with another person, which doesn't seem like it makes sense considering the fact that we're talking about being frustrated about being called a liar. But there's just something about debating with someone on whether or not something's right or wrong. There's very little chance for discourse in my normal life, so being able to have a footing to prove my logic to others is pretty neat, especially when I'm right. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the drama I had with others as well. Even if I wasn't one of the ones lying to others as the Mafia. The pure prospect of stirring someone up just to see what kind of reaction they'd give off is something that gives me investigative satisfaction. Picking apart the ways that people respond to things and seeing if I could pick up on the way they'd lie about things almost made me feel like a detective once my suspicions piled up. Even as the Mafia, it's even more amusing trying to throw other players under the bus and trying to make it seem like they were the deceitful ones by weaving my own fabrics of lies based on the way they're acting. It almost gives me a high whenever I'm drilling into someone and others tend to agree with me and they go down, while no one suspects me all the while. But the other side of the spectrum is true as well. It's often said to myself, why would someone say this? Or something about the way he phrased that just doesn't sit with me. I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at seeing when people are lying to me, and when those minor suspicions all come out to be true and it turns out the person I thought was a part of the Mafia actually was, this social boost satisfaction could never be topped. It's while playing these games that a realization hits after a while. Not after one match, but after playing numerous games, that we're all just normal players interacting with each other. No matter how long you've been playing for, there's no real way to tell that someone's actually lying. But just as well on the other side, there's no clear way to perfectly lie to someone. It's a game that's balanced with human nature, rather than something that someone can just figure out eventually. This is why Among Us was such a great game. Well, it does get boring after a while. There's nothing like catching someone in the act of lying, or just as well lying in someone's face and them just eating it up. We do these things on a daily basis to protect ourselves or others. But sometimes it just feels good to let it out when you know someone's lying. Or to just say a lie to someone that you've been holding back from saying, as to not ruin a relationship. Or to ruin one, for that matter. Tools that were built into human nature from the very start, but aren't able to be utilized in ways that are satisfying in daily life. Unless you're a sociopath. Honestly, working together with people you don't trust is quite an interesting prospect. Trying to weed out the people that you do believe and weeding out those that you don't think are on your side is like working on some sort of mental puzzle. Almost like making friends with everyone in the game by choice to coax their true motives out of them. I just can't help but enjoy playing detective every time I get into a game. Because it's not that often I get to share what I'm thinking to an entire group and have them decide whether or not I'm right. Sure, I could go to an AA meeting and talk about how much I love cats, but every player is actively attempting to achieve the same goal you are. So of course you're willing to get out there and say what you need to say, no matter how silly or absurd. They want to know what you're saying just as much as you want to know what they're saying to see if they're trustworthy. After all, the game of Mafia is about communicating your ideas to a crowd and how that reflects on you. That just as much as interacting with others and playing detective. It's why Mafia is one of my favorite games of all time. And it's probably why I just can't get it out of my head. Well, hey, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. An ultra awesome, amazing special thank you to my supporters. Lord Don Froggy Bus, Jim Jam the Jukebox, Paul Eve, the Biker Sis, Master, for the love of God, please get in the robot Shenji, and of course, JazzyPanda, who really needs a nickname. Of course, I'll link the forum game in question to Mafia Scum in the description down below. And if you're curious about the game, you literally only need 6 willing friends and you can go forth. So thanks again and have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow. And now that the video's over with, you can all stick around and watch me address all those caveats. Oh, nope, they all left. Okay, well, I'll do it anyway. Not every game needs a moderator. There's actually restrictive ways to play without them. They don't always work, and they can be fun with a small amount of players. Some moderators can actually play active roles in shaping the game in certain game modes. It's heavily discouraged, but it can be possible. In some games, players aren't given their own alignments. It's also frowned upon. Not all games have mafia. There's cults, werewolves, serial killers, aliens. Not all games have townfolk. Some rare games can be comprised of only killing factions. Or there's games where everyone's a serial killer. A player that has to kill another player every night. Despite there being a night phase in most games, there are actually a few games that take place only in day phases. In some games, the objective is not to lynch the imposter. Like the Jester. If they were lynched, the game would end and they would win. In Forum Mafia, players are free to vote as they please. Some in-person games do that as well, but it's harder to keep track of. The optimal strategy of the Mafia is not always to divert attention away from you. Sometimes drawing attention to you can make you seem like less of the Mafia. I do that a lot. Once again, once someone gets lynched, sometimes it rolls over to the second day, and there's no night phase. If the night phase happens again and there's no factions, the town win regardless. The Mafia can just as easily use their night kill to kill someone that they want to get rid of in the game, and they could also find someone good that they want to keep around. But they can also find someone that they don't want in the game and keep them around. It's all situational. To win the game in Mafia, there's many different ways to go about it, i.e. the Mafia can actually win by killing certain targets, if specified by the game moderator. And that's it. I'll see you tomorrow.